Hi, I'm Michael Wiafe.
And I'm Demetria Wack.
Welcome to PolicyWise.
Both Democrats and Republicans have undergone ideological shifts over the last decade, leading to varying perceptions of progress and often also great fractures between and within the two parties. As the winners of the 2020 elections take their seats, we move on to a new era of political leaders. Today, we have the opportunity to speak to a young member of the Republican Party and talk about the future of the Republican Party in California. We are so pleased to have Blake Zanti with us today.
Demi and Michael, great to be on your podcast. Very honored to be on with you all today. My name is Blake. I was born and raised in Fresno, California. Ended up going to represent the 559 Central Valley. Go Dogs. Ended up going to Fresno State, stayed local for college, and then eventually ended up working full-time in government and politics, and that's still what I'm doing. I guess it's only been a couple of years since I graduated, so I'm still kind of freshly out of college, although it's coming up on 3 years now, so it's crazy how fast time's flying. I currently work in the state legislature. I'm a communications director for Senator Andreas Borges. He's a Republican in the state Senate. I've really enjoyed that experience, kind of got into that role through the Senate Fellowship Program in Sacramento. It's a partnership with Sacramento State and the state legislature. I'm engaged. I'm getting married in April, and so I'm stoked for that. Yeah,
Congratulations.
I'm really pumped. Thank you. Yeah,
and it's so exciting to have you on. I should mention to the listeners, like Blake is like a lifelong friend, and we actually like served together in student government, and like has been just like a huge part of my life, and especially like in my decision to like get interested in politics and all that. Like really huge honor to have you on today, and I'm really excited to talk to you about I know we have kind of we have like very like a lot of opinions that align and a lot of opinions that differ. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about the future of the Republican Party, and
it's going to be a great discussion.
I'm so excited. So why don't you just start us off, and what does the future of the California Republican Party look like in your opinion?
Definitely. Well, that's a big question to start off with, but that's a good one because I think it kind of sets like the context in the frame of kind of where I think not only we're going as a country, but also as a state here in California as well. So in terms of the direction of the Republican Party, I think, there's no denying that it's definitely changed a lot over the course of the last few years. Especially with the recent administration. I think it's definitely been pushed in a unanticipated and different direction. And so I think that's caused a lot of interesting things to happen. I've definitely seen, some Republicans who are, thinking or considering or already have left the party because they don't identify currently with some of the things that are going on. I definitely have seen, some who are more reinforced in, by current events and what's going on and reinforced in their beliefs. So it's really interesting to see kind of how, different people are reacting, and especially leaders within the party among the ranks, how they're all reacting as well. I think we've kind of seen a mix of responses, from senators like, Mitt Romney, all the way to, senators like, a Lindsey Graham type of figure. So it's really, really interesting to look at and see this mix of opinions. But I think more specifically, the future of the California Republican Party is really interesting because, there were a couple of different flips, I think, at the state level and at the congressional level in terms of, new congressional representatives, either that are, Republicans and that won, or, state representatives that lost and, they were beaten by a Democrat. So I think that's important because there's no denying that the presidential administration has influenced that and has really, created a shakeup. And I think, kind of, in my opinion, I think it's set back the brand of the California Republican Party, and moving forward, I think, and I think this is already happening with some current leaders and discussions going on, but I think, definitely there's a struggle to try to kind of find a new identity and kind of create a new brand moving forward for the California Republican Party to be successful and grow. So that's kind of my initial thoughts. And I know that was a lot of words and info, but I would love to hear your feedback on that and kind of what do you think the direction is, as somebody maybe on the opposite side or from the outside looking in?
Well,
Either Michael or Demi. Yeah, love
Blake,
to hear.
you put that in a fantastic way, I think. You kind of framed it without naming specifics, which I love. I absolutely appreciate the brevity. Because once you start getting to nitty-gritty details, it kind of gets
Yeah,
a
for
lot.
sure.
I guess kind of something I'm wondering from what you're mentioning is kind of the policy aspects. I noticed that you picked out the difference between the California Republican Party and the National Republican Party. And so, of course, there's going to be a big difference in priorities and the space in which they operate in. And I guess something that I see between the two is that the state party might focus a lot more on policy. There's a lot more just policy centric rather than rhetoric, and knowing that, your words don't have as much of an effect as maybe the National Party does. So that's kind of my initial thought, is kind of like wondering where policy kind of fits as a key into that whole, and how that has kind of morphed over time. Where before parties were kind of a way to get all your elected officials, all your people under one, these are the things that we fight for in every city,
Right.
county, state, everything, all the above, into now it's, the national, the Republicans nationally no longer have a platform. And so, you're kind of shifting away from this policy centric way of politics into more of, I guess, a rhetoric based. And so I guess, how do you see that? And I guess that's my response to what you were saying. How do you see that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Those are some great points. And I think that, moving forward, in California, I would agree, it definitely is more policy centric at the state level. And, that's something that I kind of get to see day in and day out. And I think largely, especially recently with coronavirus and all of these different, wildfires, these situations going on, I think that Republicans and Democrats at the state level have actually come together in more ways than opposing each other in more ways, just because of the nature of trying to solve these huge challenges that are happening and impacting Californians of all stripes, all different backgrounds. They're all getting impacted negatively by these different things that are going on that are unprecedented. So, and if you do the simple math, I mean, I think, at the state level, Republicans don't have the adequate numbers to be able to pass legislation. So they're really forced on critical policy matters to work with Democrats, kind of build unique coalitions and, kind of join up if they really truly want to see a policy or a bill reach the finish line and get signed by the governor. So it's also, I think, I would definitely love to see more balance. And I think balance is always very healthy for democracy when you have, an equal or close to equal amount of, ideas and representatives kind of on both sides. I think it leads to better policy being created. But, I do think that there is more common ground than there is not, in terms of, working towards solutions. I think just that the approaches in getting to those solutions on, either on the Republican and the Democratic side are just entirely different. And so that's kind of how I see the Republican Party moving forward at the state level is, I think Republicans really need to either, grapple with the fact that they're just going to be in the super minority for an extended period of time, or kind of find ways to become relevant in the policy world and introduce alternatives or solutions that stand out among their Democratic peers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And now I'm really thinking about that unique coalition building that you mentioned, and how that kind of needs to be replicated nationally as a path to unification, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it can serve as, certainly, if, and not saying that there aren't heated discussions at the state level, there definitely are. But I think, hopefully, the tumultuous period we've experienced over the past couple of weeks can, kind of serve as a wake-up call for returning to kind of that unity and civility as we're moving forward. Because even though we've heard, I think, some loud cries among, certain supporters, whether it be Trump supporters or people opposed to Trump, I think that a majority of Americans, actually a vast majority, are tired of the division, and it's exhausting for them. So I think that people want to see their leaders lead in the right direction, and even though the loud voices are saying otherwise, I don't think that's a vast representation of everyone's thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though it's a lot of, it's somewhat entertaining, every day. There's, new headlines every 10 minutes.
It's crazy, yeah.
Some of us are also trying to get our schooling done and our work done. And it's kind of hard when you're, you turn on TV and it's like the world's ending every single day. So it becomes a challenge. And so I think for us as young leaders, we haven't necessarily seen the way that parties and officials have changed over time. And so I think that this is a moment where, I think both the Democratic and Republican Party changed pretty strongly in the past few years, in response to individuals and occasions that have, events that have happened in this country. Do you think that the Republican Party has changed? Do you think that, this is the same party with a different leader? And how do you think so, or lack thereof?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that the party definitely has changed. I think there's no doubt. And I think it's changed in the sense that, we've really seen how the party has been pushed in a new direction, I think, at the national level, because of federal leaders kind of wanting to go forward in a new direction and champion kind of I think an agenda that really wasn't, there might be some issues that were present before, but I think, the emergence of President Trump taking office in 2016 kind of really shifted. What's that?
I said, wait, who? I'm just kidding.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like, now that he's off Twitter, it's like, I feel like my feed is just so calm now. I don't even know what's going on Twitter anymore. So, but yeah, those types of things definitely pushed it in a new direction. And there's no denying that. I think it's definitely changed, but I think that still some of the same principles have existed. I think that in terms of the brand, though, of the party, I think it's definitely been impacted by Trump, and whether that's negatively or positively, whatever your listeners believe out there, I think that's kind of up for them to decide. I think personally, in terms from a California perspective, it's been kind of a negative impact, but that's just my personal viewpoint. So
when we think about like the division between the Republican Democratic Party, I think we think of like a very, very clear division. And when we think about what makes someone either Democrat or Republican, we have like these very far apart views in our mind. You've kind of talked about ideas that I think would resonate with both parties. But could you tell us why you resonate with the Republican Party and why you would call yourself a Republican?
I guess, why I kind of decided to, join the Republican Party initially when I was, in college, really kind of harkens back to looking at classic, iconic Republican leaders, that have been prominent in politics for a long time. I was really an admirer of, John McCain, somebody who was kind of a consensus builder, but still had, kind of identified with Republican principles, like, low taxes, kind of having a free market economy, and those sorts of ideas. And I think those are ideas that really resonated with me, and kind of why initially I identified with the Republican Party early on. I think that agriculture is something very big in the Central Valley. Growing up around it, and traditionally it's been a Republican. I feel like a lot of Republicans have always been strong advocates for agriculture, strong advocates for small business, and so those types of I think ideas really resonated with me and kind of inspired me to want to continue identifying with the Republican Party. And there are definitely things that I disagree with. At the federal level, I do think that there are still a lot of defining principles that I agree with, but I do think that there are huge, significant changes that need to be made moving forward if the Republican Party is going to kind of rebrand and survive.
Blake, something that you brought up that I really like is that you've had political leaders and things that have happened, I guess, to you in your own individual situation that have made you kind of respect the platform, and I think that that's just about everybody. So I'm going to ask everybody in this question in this conversation, which 3 political leaders best describe your politics best, and which one from the opposite side? So pick another, a fourth, from the ideological spectrum would you not mind working with? And so I can get started. They don't have to be alive. So this is, both deceased and with us. And so I think the 3 that best describe mine, definitely Barack Obama. I am a fan of Governor Newsom. And that third one is going to be tough, but it's definitely kind of a battle between Shirley Weber and Bernie Sanders, I think. And one from the opposite side, you already mentioned him. I'm actually a really big fan of John McCain. Like, I think in 2008, I was, versus Obama. Obama's, my Mount Rushmore of politicians. But now that I look back, I'm like, you know what? I actually wouldn't be all that mad at a president, McCain. There's multiple different reasons for that. My favorite McCain moment is when, he saved Obamacare single-handedly at like 1 a.m. in the morning on the Senate floor. But anyway, Blake, what do you think? Who are your top, and who would you not mind working with?
I guess 3 that kind of describe my ideology would probably be Abraham Lincoln. He's classic. You can't go wrong, with Abraham Lincoln. He's just kind of an iconic figure in the Republican Party. A consensus builder, somebody who kind of saved the Union. John McCain, probably another one. And then I would also say President George H.W. Bush. I think I really admired a lot of his foreign policy experience, and I think that he just was a really good leader as well. And I think somebody on the opposite side, that's a tough one, that I wouldn't mind working with. My Republican friends that hear me say this are going to be like, what the heck? I do really think in a lot of ways, I look at President Barack Obama. I think that he also is a really remarkable leader. I think he did show moments where he was really trying to build consensus early on in his presidency and work with Republicans. And he also, I really like, some of the, messages he puts out about, national unity, kind of trying to inspire the veteran people. I see a lot of the stuff that he continues to put out. So I think I wouldn't mind working with him on the other side of the aisle.
I can't help but say that I think that's a great answer.
Also, the video, I saw this video. I'm sure everyone has seen it, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, but of him making the basketball shot when he's on his way, just walking out of the gym is incredible. I'm like, wow, I can't believe that.
And the way he walked after, it's like he just came off of the NBA court.
It was incredible. So that was nuts.
Okay, so I think I would do Michael Wiafe and Blake Zanti.
Wow. Can we get that played back again?
Yeah, I make sure that's recorded and not edited out at all.
Right.
When it comes to this side of politics, it's just so I feel like I don't know any of these people well enough to be yes, this is exactly how. I've never seen them work behind the curtain, so it's hard for me to know exactly where it would go. So I'm gonna just throw out some philosophers, and I'm just gonna go with Paulo Freire, John Dewey, and okay. You know what? That's it. That's it. It's just like all education people who just really put education policy first, because that's like so. And Shirley Weber, and those would be like my three on this side of the aisle. And then on the opposite side of the aisle, I don't know his name. This is so bad, but I just listened to one of the representatives from, I don't remember where, so this is really helpful for the listeners, but he was just on the Daily, and he's a Republican who he voted to impeach Trump, and he just talked a lot about like his politics after the fact. I just thought he just sounded like he had a good head on his shoulders, and there was like a lot of thing. He just looked like sounded like a consensus builder, and I was a fan of the things he said, not all of it, but I was like, okay, this he seems like he has some of it on straight. If I had like a room full of people, I know I talked to Blake about this, I would just like fill it with like the most like controversial opposite sides of the spectrum, like people, just so they could like duke it out, and then they could inform me on the consensus that they made. So like if I had a cabinet, it would just be people from like all over the place. They would figure it out, and then they would tell me what to do, and we'd be good to go. That would so yeah, maybe Michael and Blake would be a good consensus building opposite sides of the aisle group. Yeah.
I was about to say, Demi, the fact that you named philosophers, like,
That's a very Demi thing to do, just like
right?
naming a philosopher.
Like you just ended the conversation. Nobody's gonna say anything to that. Like the
Yeah. I think also, this is not necessarily a political leader, but more of like a educational, institutional leader that I really admire. And Demi knows exactly who I'm going to say right now. But I think Dr. Joseph Castro, the new chancellor for the CSU, I feel like he is somebody who's just like an incredible leader that I got to, learn a lot from when I was at Fresno State. And he is a really incredible consensus builder and leader, and is just super intelligent guy. And just the unbelievable amounts of like moments of pressure he's been through, and just how he remains calm is like remarkable. I wish I could do that all the time, but it's pretty nuts.
Not to throw us like completely off topic, but do you all watch The West Wing?
I've not.
Okay.
Great show. I've watched it.
Listeners, yeah, tune in. Yeah, great show. And I was debating it last night with a friend, and I was like, you know what? I just really didn't agree with Bartlett on that. And like, it's hard for you to say because like personally, you want to agree with Bartlett. That's the president. Like he just says he's a really likable character. And but I was thinking, I was like, I was just thinking, I was like, Dr. Joseph Castro wouldn't have done that. Just Dr. Joseph Castro would have figured it out and would have had like all these other things planned. And I am just such a huge fan. Like just an incredible leader. And I'm glad you brought him up.
I remember the first time meeting him at Fresno State, and he was wearing like very casual, very chill, didn't have that like normal university president kind of aura about them. And is just one of those leaders that you just can't make up. Like you just cannot make the dude up. Okay, so the question I want to ask both of you, so you mentioned this kind of in your responses and throughout the episode, when you say consensus building, what necessarily do you mean by that, especially in a political or do you mean it in a policy sense where you're kind of making everyone agree, or how do you build consensus within this kind of spectrum, and why is that important for leadership, and even how you might view the way that they kind of package their policies as well?
I definitely think it's like it's probably one of the hardest things to do in politics, but I think you see I feel like, in my opinion, like the real leaders emerge when they're able to kind of garner consensus on an issue. And I guess in terms of what does that really mean, I think it's both in a political and a policy context. I think that you need both, and it really entails just trying to find common ground and find negotiate and try to find the middle ground on whatever policy or whatever political stance that you're going to take is. And I think it happens internally within parties, Democrat or Republican, trying to form a position on an issue. And it definitely happens across party lines, trying to be able to get a bill passed, or create some find a solution to a challenge. I definitely think that in terms of like what it really like specifically entails. You know, there's a saying, I don't know who said this, but it's something that I always kind of like keep in the back of my mind is always strive to make a principled compromise without compromising your principles. And I think that's something that's really
Oh, that
important.
was
So,
me. That was me.
did you say that? I don't know. Okay. Yeah, I
No,
mean, you
no.
must be one of my philosophers that I was reading the other day, Demi. I don't know. I remember hearing that somewhere, and I just thought that was a really good way to approach things. Like, there are definitely principles that you have that you aren't willing to compromise on, like values that you are, raised with, things that you feel like are important to you that you're not willing to negotiate. But you want to make sure that you're also being reasonable and trying to reach across, work with other people, and be open and understanding of their perspective and experience as well. Probably, and our basically our opinions are really shaped by our personal experiences, how we were raised, our environment, and I think that's something really important to understand. So when somebody is saying they experience something different, it's really important to have that open mind, in my opinion, to be able to reach that middle ground. And so I think that's something we need more of. And I feel like the real leaders in legislative politics are the ones that are able to bring people along with them on both sides of the aisle on an idea or an issue.
Are there what are the values for you that are that you're not going to compromise are? And are there any of them that you think are strictly, strictly Republican? Or, do you think that they're more cross-party values?
It varies from person to person. I guess, when I think of values, there are some that are relatable to like a political party. I guess when I think of values, I'm more thinking of like deep rooted values, not just like party values. So I'm thinking of like, treating people with like, common respect, showing, I guess, demonstrating like an honest and open approach to an issue, kind of those sorts of things, because I think those are principles that kind of guide um, discussions and kind of guide you to reach a solution. I think it varies from person to person. They could be, some people really firmly believe like, oh, no taxes. That's like my principle. I firmly believe in that. And that's a value of mine. So I think, you really have to find out what the person you're working with across on the other side of an issue, what their values are and the things that they're not willing to compromise on, but the things that they are willing to compromise on and maybe negotiate on a little bit. So, like, I guess for me personally, they're not so much party values, they're more just like human values, you could say.
Because of the way that they kind of went about, you kind of lose that factor of it, right? Like you forget the difference between political and human values because of I guess the method in which they're brought about. But Demi, I still wanted to push your thoughts on consensus building.
My thoughts on consensus building. So I guess where I differ from Blake's statement is that I don't think there are values that should never be critiqued and shaped if you are someone who's trying to really learn and understand and put yourself in others' shoes. So for me, when Blake talks about core values, that was my initial approach. And I have to say, when Blake talks about just human feeling, human values, I think I can really resonate with that and align with that. And I think the things that I would be unwilling to compromise on in that sense would be the feeling that people deserve to be treated fairly and equally and with respect under all circumstances, and that people should be able to have the freedoms without compromising the freedoms of others. And I think that's a really key point. And for me, that is a really tied down value of mine. But when it comes to stances on an issue, maybe Blake and I are on different, on the same line, but maybe different parts of the spectrum of how we feel about this. But I really feel values can completely shift depending on new information that comes about and new information that you receive. And I also feel a strong value that I hold is actively trying to figure that out. So it's actively trying to have your mind be changed. When it comes to consensus building, I agree with Blake in the sense yes, like it's so important to listen and understand that other person's viewpoint. However, when it comes to consensus building, you're getting such like a filtered thought. Like unfortunately, the way that our democracy works is it's not an important democracy. So if you're debating with someone who's in the seat against you, you're likely going to be debating. You're not debating with like a actual representative reflection of what the US looks like. Say that I'm like a federal representative. You're debating with people who a lot of the times, like the majority of which I just don't feel like is yet could be completely reflective of the way that our world works. There could be a lot more representation, in a lot more areas. And if that was like the total case, if we had a perfect reflection, if campaign finance laws like weren't a thing and or I guess were more of a thing, I think that would be a big step in the right direction. But for now, I think there's like a lot of information that you have to take into account outside of the conversations that you're having with an individual, especially in these positions, just because I just don't feel like it is like that representative. If that makes any sense, if everyone catches what I'm saying, otherwise I can like come back on that. But I do feel like I'm a huge fan of taking in other people's perspectives. But at the end of the day, like you have to speak out extra for the voices that aren't being spoken for at all in those spaces. So that's kind of my opinion on consensus building.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think, and that's like a value, I think definitely people's values do shift over time. I would agree with that.
Thank
Cool.
you
Well,
for putting yourself in my shoe, Blake. Choose Blake. Glad
I
we
was
could
trying
go-
to openly, make myself change my mind when you were talking. And that's what you were talking about, Demi. So I just wanted to really embrace what you were saying.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you.
so I'm gonna bring up something somewhat controversial, I think, in some circles. Blake and Demi, have you both seen Obama's kind of quick critique of the defund the police kind of slogan?
Yes, I have seen it.
Yeah, I think I saw something like from him on Twitter or something.
Basically, he called it a snappy slogan, and essentially said, something like that is gonna have a very difficult time getting through. The snappy slogan of defund the police is gonna have a very difficult time getting through, and actually trying to create change. And it drew a lot of critique from activist communities, basically saying that you shouldn't have to kind of change your language or change the slogan to kind of fit the white community that you're trying to appease to, is the baseline of that argument. And so Obama kind of came back and said, that's not what he was going for, and that there's kind of uh, basically that's not what he was going for. And so this has been a huge conversation. My personal opinion is basically that there's kind of a difference between rhetorical and campaign consensus building and sort of with the slogan where you're just trying to get as many people on board as quick as you can. And then I think that there's a difference between that and policy consensus building, right? Where you're trying to push something across, kind of what Demi's saying, with you're trying to convince 100 people from these places, these specific individuals to pass something. You basically have to talk to these people individually and get their individual case to pass this bill instead of hoping that just one phrase will work and kind of do the point. And so I think Obama was coming from like a political policy standpoint where it's just like you have a map of every senator and you're trying to get everybody across the finish line. A slogan wouldn't work for that, right? You would really have to have those individual conversations with folks. And so I guess Blake, to that, the question that I have for you is if you have any thoughts on that. And I guess, how do you see this kind of slogan consensus building, build the wall, pushed a lot of people away, but also pulled a lot of people in right off the bat? And whether or not that was actually what was trying to be done, that's what everybody saw it as. And so do you think that that was part of the way in which some of the Republican Party might have changed in the past few years? And do you think that there are more key issues that Republicans, especially in California, might be taking aggressively, and maybe what kind of unique consensus might be built through this?
A lot of dimensions to that question, but I love it. I think that if there's anything we've learned over the past couple of weeks, I think it's, rhetoric and words are important, right? They matter, and that they can really drive people to take action one way or another, positive or negatively, or take no action at all. It really just depends on what the rhetoric are and what the rhetoric is and what the words are. Leaders kind of try to steer the conversation by introducing their own perspective, their own opinion. I don't really know what Obama's intention was with trying to, kind of attack the slogan, I guess, so to speak. But it's possible that he, was trying to bring more people on board. Maybe that, people that were like traditionally pro law enforcement, folks or communities, to maybe, or maybe try to get past this, the association of defund the police as like eradicating the police. And I think I'm trying to be objective in that statement. I have my own personal feelings on it, but I think
Mhm.
that I think I'm trying to be objective in like that may have been his intention. I don't know. I think but definitely in terms of like a Republican perspective, we've seen how rhetoric is very important. It motivates people. It can incite. It can you know cause people to follow and do things. And it's really important to choose leaders who yeah, maybe you love their ideas, maybe you really agree with a lot of their ideas or the general concept of what they're fighting for. But if they are somebody who can't communicate effectively, it's such a critical quality of a leader, is to be able to effectively communicate. And if that's something that they're not able to do, I think that people really need to kind of take a step back and look at whether or not this is a good person to support. um that's hard too, because we also live in a and you can vote for whoever you want. We don't want to be limiting in factors of leaders as well. We want it to be an open society where people are able to vote and choose their leaders who they want. But I think that um, definitely, I think a lot of the rhetoric has definitely shaped the Republican Party and pushed it in a direction that it's going to be tough to kind of salvage the old, I guess you could say, Republican Party that once stood before.
I have to, I'm so sorry to the listeners because I just started watching The West Wing and now it's going to be in every episode. Um, but the show really does challenge, like, you can have like these ideas of like these philosophers in your head of this, kind of utopia, perfect world, of like consensus building and everyone's getting along and we're all working towards the same thing. But then you watch a show like this, or you actually, you kind of feel like you get like a lens into what's happening, like, and of like, behind the back scene of politics. And there's so much that goes into it. And Michael, I think you really hit it on the head of like the importance of rhetoric. What I have to say about it is like, I understand Obama's point, but I also have to say that his rhetoric, like, I just think that he should have been a lot more careful and more direct and more clear about what he meant, and it should have been way more like constructively critical than just anything that it's super super negative. With that said, I do think what he is trying to do is what Blake captured, which is like trying to draw in the people who are pro police. So Blake, would you tell us, just to kind of wrap us up, it's been so good having you on the podcast. But you also have a podcast yourself. Would you want to introduce us to that and then also say like any last comments?
Sure. I gotta admit, the podcast has been very inactive over the last several months, just because I do it with a friend of mine. We call it Real People, Real Coffee, and it's really just about the name is kind of tacky, but the aim of it is to kind of just have real
Snappy.
Yeah, you could call it snappy. One could refer to it as snappy, maybe, but it's kind of, the aim of it is just to have like real, genuine, candid conversations with people about, and particularly we love having like young professionals on, just kind of what are they doing in their community, kind of what's their goal, what are they doing in their career, how did they get into it, and so that's kind of the aim of it. We haven't done it recently because and this is a great format, this virtual format that we're doing, but our aim is to like have guests on in person. Obviously, that hasn't been safe to do in the last many months, but so we're just kind of putting it on hold. But we're hoping to kind of take it up again. And also I kind of got sidetracked on producing it during the election that I ran for when I ran for local office. So that's kind of also how it stopped as well. And but hoping to take it up again. Well, if anyone ever wants to reach out to me, I'm on, social media. Feel free to reach out, or, if you want to respond to something I said, please feel free to do so. If you're young and you're feeling maybe that you're not a part of the policymaking process, but you're interested in getting involved, running for office, doing something like that, you can absolutely do it. I attempted to do it. I wasn't successful, but I think it was a really rewarding and valuable experience. And it definitely, just having the opportunity to be able to do that and try to be a part of the process is something that is so valuable about our country. So if you're, no matter what political party you are, what your beliefs are, I think if you're interested in getting involved and you're a young person, definitely, absolutely do it. Get involved on a commission, get involved on a local board, or, run for elected office, get involved in community organizations, because that is, you can make a difference doing that. And you don't have to be somebody who's well into their, career or much older with more experience to be able to have a say and make your voice heard and represent a segment of young people that are, coming up into the workforce now and emerging. So definitely encourage you to look into that if that's something you're interested in.
This was a podcast recording of PolicyWise. We are your hosts, Michael
and Demi. PolicyWise is a production of Youth Leadership Institute in partnership with California Forward and their Young Leaders Advisory Council. Jared Amonos produced this episode.
If you want to find more great youth content, check out YLI.org and be sure to subscribe to PolicyWise on iTunes and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a review. It really helps.
To discuss this episode, engage with us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PolicyWisePod and hashtag your discussion with hashtag PolicyWise.
See you next time for more youth voice and policy discussion on PolicyWise.